Welcome back to the user interface building process. This is the last video in building the UI. In this video, we're going to cover building the work form as well as the about form. So let's get started. This is where we left off. We have the payment control, the default control, the client control, and the main control. Control, and this one we're going to call the work control, and we'll set it up the same way as before. So let's go over here to our payment control. We'll copy our font size, and let's go ahead and take that extra space out, and we'll paste that in over our That gives us a good starting point to work with that we can then modify from there. So we'll start with, this isn't payments, this is work. And maybe you can call it client work. That way it's kind of a little more clear. Work is fine internally, but for the users of this, it makes a little more sense to say this is the work you've done for clients. So client work, and the very first thing is the client dropdown, which is correct. That's what we want. Amount. Let's call this the let's start with the hours. And so let's actually just use this one. So we'll say this is row 3, and we'll delete row 3. So this is how many hours were worked for a given client. Now, typically we won't add work here. We'll add it on the main form, but this way we can see and edit the existing work. So, and you know what? That actually raises a point. Do we want to allow them to edit work when the main control allows them to enter work? And I think the answer is probably no. It would seem like we wouldn't want them to add new work there. We want them to just edit the work. And so maybe you can call this edit client work instead of just client work. And we don't allow them the option of new. So we just take, let's take all of this right here and we paste it in here. Then we Control X to cut this out and paste it right over top of this. And there we go. That's quite ugly. Let's go ahead and change that. All right, so there now we have a date drop down and a client drop down. And now we can actually make it look a lot more like what the main control is, where we have our, we already have our hours, but now we have our title. Let's go there, title, description. So let's grab those two things. So we have our date and we have our hours. And now below that, we'll paste our, which right now is row 3, so we'll change it to row 4. And row 5, which would normally make this row 6, but really this is going to be probably row 8. So let's make this row 8 just to start off. We can always change it later, but that way it's down below. So now we have a client, we have what date we did the work, then the hours, the title, the description. But we need to keep going on this, so let's make this a little bit taller. Let's make this 525. And we'll add a few more rows. Extra rows don't really hurt, okay? So you have extra rows. There's going to be empty if they're set to auto. Okay, they won't have any height at all. So we have title and description, but we also need a couple more things here. We need a drop down, we have actually a checkbox to say, have they paid? And if so, what payment was it? Okay, and we'll probably choose based upon the payment date or the payment amount, something like that. In fact, a prior drop down will have the date and the amount for that particular client. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and add one more row. We're going to have a checkbox and a drop down. So let's do it manually instead of copy and paste. And since we don't have one that really fits, we'll say row 6. And this is going to be a stack panel with the orientation of horizontal. And we're going to say it's grid.row 6. And then the margin is 5, 5, 5, 10, like everything else. And then inside of here, which makes this row 7, by the way, which is kind of nice. Not that it changes a whole lot, but it gives us one less row to work with. Okay, so now what we need to have a checkbox first. So we have a checkbox, let's see, right here. Let's just grab that. Just so we have kind of the settings for it, including the margin, which that way it keeps the same margin we had previously. And instead of pre-build checkbox, we're going to call this the paid checkbox. And we're going to say just paid in here. Okay. And that lets us know if the user has paid or not. If they haven't paid, it's unchecked. If they've paid, it's checked. Now, the next thing is going to be a drop down that is the payment. It'll be the payment date essentially. So let's actually grab the a drop down for our date. And we're going to come down here to our checkbox. We're going to paste it in, take away our margin and our grid.row. And we're going to change this to be our payment dropdown. And we'll call this payment. And that looks kind of ugly right now. So let's figure out how we can make this be a little more acceptable. First of all, let's change this checkbox. Let's first of all space it like that. And then we'll say that our vertical alignment is, let's start with bottom and see how that looks. That's probably better. And then our payment, it should probably have a width for our drop down, and that should be probably 150. Let's make it 200. That's a little better. So now it's not the most pretty thing I've ever seen. There's things we could do to make this a little better maybe, but overall it seems like it works. It seems like the layout is correct. I mean, if we check the box, then this appears. And once it appears, you can pull down a drop down, check the one you want, which will be both the date and the amount they paid. That way it's very clear which payment it was by, of course, this particular client. That way they can make a change, or they can come in here and say, okay, now we've done the result of which item is selected in this checkbox or this dropdown. Okay, so I think that all makes sense, and I think the layout works. Now let's go to our main window and say work control and run this and see what we get. And it's a little too tall. We have to make it a little bigger in order to make it work. So again, we're coming back over here and saying, boy, this needs to be 6, try not to make it too tall, but 625. And that works. So I'm not real thrilled with it. I would love to have it be shrunk down a little bit more, but I'm not seeing a great way of doing that. And I don't want my form to just be tiny. So this isn't huge. It does the job and allows us to very and I call them form, but they're actually controls, which are pretty close to the same thing. And we're going to call this the about control. So this one, we're going to do the exact same thing as all the rest. We'll make the resizes. We'll go to the work control and copy these settings. And we'll paste them in here. And we'll move it around so you can see it. Now, this one's a little bit different because this one isn't so much about, it's not about entering data, it's about displaying information. So we can copy this. Let's copy at least through the title. But I think we'll probably trim down the number of rows. I don't think we need that many. So we're going to say about. And we'll say about build time. Now let's just say about. And then we can do a few more rows and just kind of put basic information about this application. So text block, and let's make the font size to be even bigger. So 32. And we'll say build time app. And by the way, we have to move that to row 1. And I don't know why this isn't on row 0. I mean, it's defaulting to row 0, but I usually specify row 0. So let's go ahead and specify that previously. So in the work control. And let's look at the others to see if, yep, copy and paste. So I copy and pasted what, it's not an error, but it's something that I'm not a big fan of, is assuming. So let's go ahead and make sure that all of these are set to be the right grid row, which doesn't change anything because you're already there by default. But this way it's more explicit. Okay, so now we have build time app. About left and right because we don't have a real spacing issue there. But top and bottom, let's make it 20. That way you have some space. And then we can also change the font style, but let's go ahead and do that in the properties because it's a little bit easier to do. Let's go ahead and look at and I'm also going to make this font to be bold. So let's go back. So that's our foreground color. Let's minimize the layout for a minute and go over to our text and say, it's not, I don't want Segio UI. I want that Open Sans, but extra bold. Okay. And we'll make this even bigger. Let's play around and see what, 36 looks like. That was good. I'm not a huge fan of extra open, the extra bold. How about light? It's a little too thin for me. Let's go with semi-bold. And let's make it even bigger. Okay. 48 is a little too big. So let's go more like 42. Well, let's go over here and say 42. Okay, so now we have our title, and we've made some modifications, but we've made it in the designer. That way we can just, we can copy and paste essentially if we wanted to have the same things in something else. So let's create a paragraph, and we'll put it in the same orange. Just add some kind of color. I mean, it's no big deal. But let's make this 22, and we'll put this in grid row 2. Okay, and this is going to be, it's still be semi-bold. That's fine. But instead of build time app, we'll say by Tim Corey. And let's change the margin to be 20 below. So that's down here. But it's going to be, let's start with 0 and see how that looks. It looks a lot better, I think. It's kind of, in fact, let's make this 20 above and 10 below. Now it kind of tucks that up underneath, which is good. And then I need to put my row 2 here. And this is just playing around, making things look kind of nice. So I'll make this row 3. And we're going to make this open sans, but we'll change it to be thin. So let's go back over here to our drop down. Instead of saying semi-bold, we'll make it, let's just do open sans or open sans light. Let's look at the difference. Yeah, I think that we'll go with just open sans. And 22 is probably okay. We'll play around it in a minute. But let's say this application was built to show off SQLite. We need to have a word wrap here, though. Text wrapping is wrap. There we go. And now we're going to need to add some margins on the left and right to make sure we don't go too far over. So let's make those 5. Just to give it a little bit of spacing there. This application is built to show off SQLite as well as the basics of WPF. It is a demo application to help a developer test what they have learned. Probably a URL down here that gives us a little more. And then let's also change the background color. Let's see if we can't make something a little more flashy for this. So let's change the background color. I'm going to grab another one of the colors that I like. And let's go back up here to our background. Go to our properties, background. And let's select a color down here. And there we go. So there's a blue. It's not the greatest right now in our layout. It's a little bit ugly, but that'll work. Another option would be I sometimes use this other blue. So let's see what that looks like. That's even worse. So let's undo that. So let's leave it this way. It's just something to do. It's a little bit different. And this, the foreground is white for the about. Okay. Again, just something to be different and show off the about page. So let's come down here to down at the bottom. we'll grab this row, we'll copy it, we'll paste it, we'll say row 4, and let's give it a margin above of 20. Okay, so you really separate out, and we're going to say for more information, and we're going to give it a URL down below. Okay, so let's copy this. And in fact, you know what? Let's put this inside of a stack panel. That way they're right on top of each other instead of far apart. And it's a little more connected because it's the same information. So I'm going to cut this and say stack panel orientation equals vertical. And I'll paste this in, but I'll grab this right here. And I'll up here. And now I can say text block. Actually, let's see if we can't put a URL in here. So what we'll do is instead of a text block, let's put a hyperlink. And let's say that the navigate URI equals, and let's just put https:/imtimcorey.com, spell it right. And then after that, we can say that, we can actually just type it out. So like so. The problem is it's yelling at me and saying, you can't do that. So you can do this. And that should mostly work. The problem is I don't believe you can actually click on this. And the reason why is because it's not in a So there's our about control. Not the greatest. I'd probably want to put a border around here or something like that. But if I click on this, nothing seems to happen. I'd have to actually copy and paste that and go to my browser. So we could leave this as is, or we could make it into a button and have it open a control. There's also some workarounds you can do. I think what I'm going to do is just leave it as it is and just know that you can't click on this. It's not the greatest. I really wish I could have it be clickable easily, but it's not easily clickable. And so I'm going to leave it like it is because it looks like a hyperlink. It just doesn't act the way I think it should. So let's go ahead and where's my about page? There we go. Let's go ahead and leave it as it is and make it a centered URL. And then what we'll do is if we have time and if we feel like it's really bugging us, then we can come back and make a modification and say that that this is clickable, and we can work on getting that clickable. But for now, at least it's visible and it's understandable what it is. Okay. The last thing is I'm going to take this out temporarily, and then I'm going to run it again and just see how it looks with the white in the background. And I kind of like that, except for, of course, the about is missing. So, and the question is, do we need the about? Or do we say that's okay? Page, and it says Build Time app by Tim Corey, what it does, and for more information, and you can eventually click on that. And I think that works for now. There's some things that Could be cleaned up, could be made a little better. But I think overall, it provides a consistent experience and it provides a small UI, which is one of our design choices, and also a simple UI, which is another design choice. And I think that the layout overall works for us. I think that the controls we've chosen and the way we've chosen to do things will make sense to the user, hopefully. And so I think that at this point, we're done with actually building our UI. So that's it for this lesson. Make sure that, before you're done, that you complete these 2 forms or controls, and maybe play around with different ways you want to lay out the about page, maybe something a little bit different, a little bit, flashy or whatever. Okay. Otherwise, once you're done this, then move on to the next lesson.